Assetto Corsa has a secret touge road, and it's probably the most underrated in the game. Most of you have it downloaded, but only a fraction will have driven it. It's a tight, narrow road that snakes its way up a gargantuan mountain. It features towns, hairpins, camber, forests, and elevation changes. The lot. So why does nobody talk about it? Steeped in a rich history, it's host to one of the longest ongoing motoring events in the world. Founded in 1925, it has bared witness to the vast evolution of Hillclimb as a sport, and the exponentially increasing capabilities of the monsters that drive it. Clocking in at almost 11 miles long, this Hillclimb has been described as absurdly dramatic, and it's easy to see why. Have you driven this road before? If not, don't worry, because most people haven't, but I can almost guarantee you've seen the name Trento Bondone in your Assetto Corsa mod list at some point. Perhaps you even remarked that you don't remember downloading it, like me, before making this video. Well, there's a good reason for that. Kunos, the developers of Assetto, actually put this into the game themselves all the way back in 2014. You can forgive yourself for not knowing, because unmodded Assetto Corsa is just a circuit racing sim, right? Well, it was clearly intended to be a hill climb simulator too. Or was it? By today's standards, 9 years on, it's pretty ugly, and looks like something an amateur modder would create, and that's because it essentially is a mod that Kunos made themselves. There are no high quality textures or furniture that we're used to seeing on their circuits, and in fact, it looks worse than almost every single modern hill climb made by singular modders, for free. With sparse details and a lack of care and attention to the small details, it's a far cry from the circuits and touges we drive that feel like the real location. Trento Bondone feels wholly unfinished. Sure, it's still drivable, but it doesn't strike me as a track that would ship with the game, more like an amateur third-party add-on. And from an Italian developer that has a keen attention to detail, you might be asking yourself why this is the case. Netcar Pro. If you're an avid Kunos enjoyer, you'll know this name. Released in 2006, this sim was the predecessor to Assetto Corsa, and it's clear that it was a testbed. It has a bare bones and quite frankly poor UI, even for Kunos, and yes, it's even worse than Assetto Corsa's default menu somehow. But the physics weren't that bad for the time, and you can definitely see how Assetto Corsa was an evolution, not just a Lancer. But by today's standards, Netcar's physics feel almost arcade-like. The car seemingly drives on rails, until it decides you need to start oversteering, in a similar way to iRacing does, which is interesting as they were released around the same time. Yet strangely, Netcar feels dated, but iRacing is revered as one of the most realistic simulations on the market. Strange. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked. Despite all of this, the force feedback is surprisingly detailed for such an old game. In fact, I get better tyre feel out of Netcar Pro than Assetto. All in all, it isn't a bad simulator, even by today's standards. I mean, hell, people are still playing Grand Prix Legends, which was released in 1998. It's a surprise Netcar wasn't more popular at the time. However, it did only ship with a handful of tracks and cars, and the modding scene didn't add much more, so perhaps Netcar wasn't the best simulator. But what it was a perfect lesson for Kunos. They needed more content in their games, whether that be through their own creation or their community, and they definitely heeded their own advice. Assetto Corsa shipped with more than enough content, with a wealth of original laser scanned circuits, a heap of high quality cars, and the ability for modding, which revolutionised the way the game was played, and of course, a single hill climb, Trento Bondone. But truth be told, Assetto Corsa's Trento was neither high quality, nor was it original. Remember how I said it was essentially a mod? Well, this is because it's the exact same version as the original from 2006. It's practically a conversion mod from Netcar Pro. Now, this isn't something that's alien to the modding community. People even convert tracks from the initial D-Arcade games into Assetto. But there's always something off about them, like they're from an alternate reality. Whether it's the textures used not quite fitting into their new Sims engine, or that the scaling is off. I don't know, but they never seem to fit in with natively created track mods. Trento Bondone suffers from this. It hasn't been updated at all, and it still looks relatively unfinished, even with custom shaders patch sprucing things up with grass and pretty skies. In fact, some people may even prefer the way Netcar looks. Strangely, everything looks more photorealistic. The lighting is brighter, the textures look sharper, and as a whole, it looks more realistic. Slap some good post-processing on this baby, and it might even look better than Assetto Corsa. Not only this, but this recreation isn't faithful to the real one at all, and it deviates quite a lot from reality. Paired with the fact that the timings don't totally work, these are the same reasons why it wasn't included in the console versions of Assetto Corsa. Which is funny, because not only are they unable to install regular touge mods, but the one that was actually included in the base game was also withheld, and that serves the filthy gamepad fondling peasants right. A specific type of person may refuse to drive it for these reasons alone. Probably the same type that would refuse because it wasn't featured in that weird cartoon, or because it isn't located in Japan. However, if you can manage to look past the unfinishedness and the fact you can't time yourself, the fact that it's in it, or the fact that it's default Assetto content, you're rewarded with an intense driving experience, especially in a proper Hillclimb car. It's essentially just hairpins connected by straights, which is surprisingly similar to Akina, and some of you may know I hate Akina. However, it does do things a little differently. The straights aren't entirely straight, the road has minute camber and elevation changes, and it does throw in some tricky corners that are hard to predict, especially when your view is obstructed by a whopping building. When you're in a road car, this may become boring, but when you're in a car specifically designed to yeet themselves up roads like this as fast as possible, the road comes alive. You're constantly teetering in the middle of setting a record time, getting up close and personal with a guardrail, and slamming on the anchors for a corner that doesn't need it. The length of it definitely comes into play too. As you climb farther up the mountain, you become increasingly cautious. It takes a good 10 to 15 minutes to reach the end, and it would be a shame to chuck away an already decent run up the hill for a mere few tenths of a second on the final corner. Like all great hill climbs, it's a strange concoction of rallying and circuit racing. It's a test of endurance, but also all-out pace. When compared to your regular Japanese touges, it does offer a slightly different flavour, so go and try this Italian Kunos default hill climb, and you never know, you might just enjoy it. Just like you might enjoy this next video in which I tell you how fast drivers steer using their feet.